Hi everyone, welcome to the IoT Hero Show, my weekly showcase of thought leadership in the Internet of Things. My name is Tom Raftery, I'm the Global IoT Evangelist for SAP, and now, on with the show. Hi everyone, welcome to the IoT Heroes podcast. Today we have a special show because we're doing a joint podcast with Ken Briodagh. Ken, do you want to join in?
Hello, folks. I am Ken Briodagh. I'm the editorial director of IoT Evolution, and this is a very special episode of the IoT Time podcast because we're here with IoT Heroes and Tom Raftery.
Awesome. This is the first time I think either of us have done a joint podcast. And I got to say, Ken, that I've been a fan and a listener to your podcast for a long time. There's two podcasts I listen to a lot, two IoT podcasts I listen to a lot, and yours is one of them. So I'm honored to be invited to come on the show.
Well, I really appreciate you listening, and unfortunately, I've just started listening to yours because I didn't know it was there, but now I do, and you've added some levity and some IoT to my morning commute, which is nice.
Excellent.
So
let me jump in first, Ken. Yeah,
Please,
let me jump in first. You've just written a book, just published a book. Tell me about that, because writing a book is probably one of the most painful things you can do, I imagine. I would dread the prospect. And yours is coming up on 200 pages, and it's all on IoT and IoT use cases, and it's available as a free download from the IoT Evolution World website, and it's available to purchase in paper from Amazon. So
that's right.
Tell me about that.
Well, it was, it's funny. It's you know how sometimes you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, oh, there's this idea, and you sort of throw it out there, and suddenly you've made yourself a whole bunch more work. Well, that's sort of how it happened. I was thinking, we've been with IoT Evolution, we've been doing this coverage for a couple of years now, and sort of watching the industry, and I keep mentioning these trends as we do our coverage. Maybe it makes sense to compile everything and sort of look at what the industry is doing and see if we can find any patterns that might help make some predictions. So I got to spend this many weeks going through all of our past coverage on IoT Evolution and sort of pulling out some of the ones that I thought were important and putting them together. And it was actually a lot of fun. I didn't sleep much for about a week as I was doing the final round of things after the writing was done. But it was really, really good. I enjoyed it, and I think that there's some valuable information out there for folks working in the IoT.
And what did anything come out of that research from the looking at the trends that surprised you, or was there anything you weren't expecting to find in there?
Well, one thing for sure was the whole sustainability piece, because and it's possible I'm potentially a cynic, but I think that the IoT as an industry has a huge potential for sustainability and ecological work and environmental projects, and sort of making energy more efficient and everything else. But I did not think that it would be a thing that was receiving focus this early in the process. And one of the things that surprised me was that it received enough focus that I dedicated a fifth of the book to it, because it was just everywhere I looked, and I just sort of hadn't put that together in my head yet.
And it's funny you should say that. I don't know if you're aware of the fact, but one of my areas of focus for a long time before joining SAP was energy and sustainability. So
I did.
So yeah, exactly. So it mapped beautifully. So it made a huge amount of sense for me to go into IoT and to join SAP. But yeah, I've written a ton of stuff on energy and sustainability over the last 10 years.
It's really, really interesting that everybody's sort of calling this IoT the fourth industrial revolution, and that's sort of becoming the thing now. And we're to some measure in the ecological state we're in now because of the first industrial revolution.
Indeed.
And so it's I think going to be very interesting if we start finding the solutions to that in the fourth one. Fourth time's the charm, I think, is what that old statement is. But the just in terms of finding efficiencies, I think there's huge value there, but there's also going to be new stuff, I think, that we can't even predict yet, really, in terms of getting energy and information from point A where it's generated to point B very far away where it's scarce in a way that causes it not to be lost. And food, and we grow enough food for everybody. We just can't get it where it needs to go.
Yeah.
I think there are supply chain solutions and fleet management solutions that can start solving that stuff.
There's a lot. I mean, I've written quite a bit about this, and on the energy side of things, it's phenomenal the gains that can be made just by connecting everything up, literally having the sources of consumption be able to talk to and listen to the sources of generation. Such that they can adjust their behavior accordingly, and the amount of savings that could be made there, and also if the sources of consumption, be it your fridge or be it in industry, large, pumps or motors or whatever they are, if they're listening out to signals from the grid. And they know when energy is abundant and when energy is scarce. As I say, they can adjust their behavior, and that way they can make enormous efficiencies and make the grid far, far more stable. And that then allows for the entry of more variable producers, the likes of the renewables, the wind and the solar. So they're balancing each other out beautifully. And when you talk
I've seen some numbers that were 30 to 40% savings on some of these systems, which is, that's huge. That's gigantic.
It is, and when you look at the costs now, the levelized cost of energy production, renewables are by far the cheapest. It's been a stunning turnaround in the last decade.
Which is really interesting. The other thing in the energy space that I find really interesting is the idea of the microgrid, and sort of instead of generating a ton of power and sending it out, generating just a little bit at a time and making it localized in smaller batches that sort of combine into one constantly fluid sharing of energy grid, a grid of grids, I guess.
And indeed, on that microgrid concept, there's been several tests of that where it's run really well, and they've used things like blockchain for the producers to share the energy amongst themselves.
There's a test that's been going on about a year here in the States, out in the Southern California and the American Southwest area. That looks very promising. Some of the power companies there have been doing some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and you mentioned food production. I think one of the big trends that we will see happening in food production is the shift to indoor and vertical farming.
Yes, that's so interesting.
Yeah, because if that first of all, it's hyper local. Secondly, it's completely organic.
Ooh, all the buzzwords.
Thirdly, you've got massive reduction of inputs required. For obviously no pesticides, but you've far lower consumption of water as well. And the last thing is, of course, the land that would have been used for it, that is no longer being used because it's being done locally in cities, in warehouses, that land can now be returned back to biodiversity and to forestation for carbon sequestration, for pulling CO2 back out of the atmosphere and turning it into plants.
Which is really great. The only downside I've seen with some of the big vertical farms and the indoor farms is the power pull becomes much greater than with a traditional farm, just for the environmental controls and that kind of thing. So I think they're
true as long as they're
find some good efficiencies.
As long as they're renewably powered, there isn't an issue.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and I think when they are, they're and it really. I saw an estimate once that it really doesn't take that much. It's not that hard for them to be off the grid for these things, to be independently powered with a turbine or two.
Yeah, and a lot of these things are powered with LED lights anyway, which don't take as much power. So
of course. So why don't you tell me a little bit about you and what you've been working on lately?
Sure.
We've talked enough about me.
We'll come back. We'll come back. I'm a former industry analyst who then joined a futurist agency and then joined SAP. My role in SAP,
Arguably another futurist agency.
some of the stuff we're doing is incredibly cool. I gotta say, it really, really is. I would tend to agree. I joined SAP as a global IoT evangelist. So what I tell people is my job is to find out the cool stuff that SAP is doing in IoT and tell everyone, which is great.
I thought you could baptize me with silicon.
I could try that too sometime, but I'm not sure I'd be good at that. So, but I'm not in the marketing arm. I'm in the strategy and development division of SAP, which is really cool. I get to see all the really nice stuff we're doing, and some of the stuff that we've productized is pretty amazing. There's one product we have, and I don't want to go too heavy on SAP on this, but I'll talk about one product we have that I think is very cool, and it's called the Asset Intelligence Network. And you've heard of that, have you?
Yeah, I have. It's very interesting because it's sort of timely in my world, just because we've just come off of the IoT Evolution Expo in February, where our entire security summit, which was designed to come up with next step for security, was about asset management and identification and good network sort of intelligence. And I feel like this is relevant.
Yeah. And it's a fascinating piece of software because it's not, it's hard to know how to classify it. It's a product, but it's also a network. So it's a product in the same way that, LinkedIn or Facebook are products. You get a login to it, and depending on your role, you get to see a specific slice of information. So if you think of a company that manufactures motors, for example, if you're a manufacturer of a motor, you get a login, you generate a motor, you enter a record for the motor in the Asset Intelligence Network. Mm-hmm. And that record for the motor contains all the build information for that motor, everything that went into it, everywhere, where all the parts came from, exploded diagrams, a digital twin, the whole thing.
Right.
Then that motor goes from the manufacturer and maybe sold to someone who then becomes the operator of that motor. So now the operator of the motor, the person who's purchased it or taken ownership of it, they get a login. They get to see all the build information. But also, they then hook it up to the Asset Intelligence Network so that all the sensors in that motor start publishing their information into the Asset Intelligence Network. And now the owner can decide who to share that information with. So the owner can say, well, I want the manufacturer to see that information.
Yeah.
Or it can be part of the contractual arrangement between the owner and the manufacturer. So that the manufacturer says, I'll give you a discount on this if you let me see the information coming from the sensors. Because that has...
So in the end, you sort of end up with one database that gives you the entire life history of the machinery.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Exactly. And it goes even beyond that, Ken, because so the manufacturer gets to see the information, as I say, contractually if the operator agrees to it. But if the manufacturer gets access to that information for the first time now, they get to see the conditions that their devices are being used in. And this can then help them with the design of the next generation of devices. Because previously, they made all these motors, they sold them, and they never saw or heard from them again. The only people who did were the appointed service centers. Now, that's another thing, because the operator can say, not alone do I want to share the information with the manufacturer, but I also want to share the information with the appointed service centers. Because now, the appointed service centers can be looking in real time and look for information that says some part is out of tolerance. And an alert can be sent to the service center, using machine learning algorithms which are aware of what it should be looking like. And then if they see something that's wrong, they send an alert to the service center, and the service center then schedules a call out, and the technician going to site knows ahead of time what the issue likely is and has the correct parts with him or her going to site. So it speeds up enormously any issues and reduces the possibility of downtime.
Right.
So,
which of course is the knell of death for
exactly. No manufacturer, and operators are often manufacturers as well. They don't want they don't want downtime on their machines.
Yeah.
So
how much human input is, once it's running, is really needed, or is it essentially all automated once you're hooked in?
It's pretty automated, and I mean we're only touching on some of the functionality because, again, the operator can decide that they want to leave their insurance company see the information. So it's, not just the service centers. Suddenly you can get charged for insurance by usage as opposed to generalized insurance. So if you think of not a motor, but if you think of
discounts for maintenance and things like that,
exactly,
I mean, a lot of opportunities.
Exactly, and you can think as well that maybe it's not a motor, maybe it's a fleet of vehicles, and suddenly you're getting charged by usage as opposed to a generalized charge, or even better, it's performance-based insurance. So your insurance goes up if your drivers are driving the machines hard, or your insurance stays within a lower band if they drive it within tolerance. So you've got all these kind of things. As well, when we were talking about service centers, I forgot to say, often if you're dealing with a service center, if you change to a different service center, you lose the service history.
Right.
But because this one network has all the information, if you switch to a new service center, you maintain access to the information, and the new service center gets access to the entire service history of the device as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's available now?
It's available now, yeah, and it has been for a while. One last thing I want to say about it. So there's another extremely cool aspect to it, and I alluded to it at the start when I said that the manufacturers and the operators could have a contractual arrangement around the sharing of information. Well, in fact, one of our clients, Kaiser, who manufacture air compressors, have started a new business based on this. You may have heard of it, where they've now switched to, instead of selling, because they haven't changed completely, they now have a new business model that they have running in parallel, where you can choose, if you go to Kaiser, if you want an air compressor, you can choose to either buy the air compressor from them, or you can choose to get air as a service. They have on the website, you can see it on their website, they have on their website a fixed price per meter cubed of air. And in that scenario, they give you the compressor and they get all the information through the asset intelligence network that's coming from the compressor. So they're maintaining the compressor for you because it's in their interest that compressor never stops compressing air, unless you turn it off because you don't want to. And it's in your interest. So your interests are completely aligned. You both want the compressor working at top notch all the time.
I love this idea, and it leads into a piece of the conversation that I really wanted to have with you, which is the idea of sort of data or information as economy. I have this sort of thing. I think I've mentioned on the podcast before. This sort of idea about creating a data stock exchange kind of thing, where these companies or independent agencies set up these huge data warehouses that are divided by vertical and demographics and all sorts of stuff, really rich data and metadata, and then everybody else sort of pays to get access to it. But the reverse side of that is paying for the services of things with the data generated by the things, and sort of leaving cash out of it, and sort of getting your cash out of that exchange area on the other side. And I'm interested to hear your opinions on how feasible this kind of, because I'm trying to solve the problem of the as a service pay schedule getting out of control, not just for individuals and consumers who've got 16 different, rental or leasing bills for their equipment in their house, but companies that are suddenly paying monthly, 5 or 6 figures out to get service on all of their manufacturing equipment all the time, when it would have been easier, if not more cost effective, to just buy the thing outright at the beginning. So how do we get people into that service economy, to the as a service model that everybody seems to want to move to, without finding a way to pay for it without having to pay for it?
I get what you're saying, and it's a very good question. I'm curious. Would cryptocurrencies start, coming in there with it? Would it start to make sense there that cryptocurrencies step in and become a large currency in this kind of environment for business services?
I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made that a cryptocurrency is just data, so you could certainly make one-to-one exchange rates and figure out how to literally know how much the data's worth.
Wow, yeah, that's a mad idea,
right? It's sort of got some legs. I think it
does. I think it does. I think it does. I think that'd be amazing, and I don't see why not. I mean, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, the problem of the subscription model at scale is just one that I haven't heard anybody come up with a good solution for yet, except that, well, they're going to have to pay for it somehow. And I'm like, they don't actually. At a certain point, if you're big enough, you don't. You just say, no, this is how we'll do it, and somebody will meet you on your terms.
Yeah. And
then the whole thing sort of falls apart. So I'm very interested to watch how that develops or hear other solutions. But right now I'm leaning on my fantasy of a data for sale economy, where I can pay for my refrigerator by letting people see how often I open and close the door.
It'll have to be something like that, though, won't it? Because particularly, I mean, we were talking manufacturing earlier, but the smart home stuff right now makes no sense. Economically makes no sense to anyone. And it needs some form of subsidy from somebody, and it'll have to be, as you say, data sharing. I mean, if you look at the likes of utilities or insurance companies, it makes sense for them in some situations to step in here. If you think of insurance companies, they hate catastrophes. They don't care if your house is robbed. That's a small ticket item. But if your house burns down or is flooded, catastrophic events like that, they really sit up and take notice. And that's something they want to avoid at all costs, because that's a big ticket.
Because a total loss essentially is never paid for by an individual customer.
Exactly.
Over the course of a policy, you're almost never paying in enough to replace a total loss.
Exactly. So if you install smart smoke alarms, the Nests, for example, or flood or moisture sensors, then I could see them stepping in to subsidize that. Would they subsidize the Philips light bulbs? Not a chance.
Right.
On the other hand,
but who might? The UI, the energy company.
That's what I was going to say. That's where the utilities step in. Because if you have connected devices, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about energy, if you have connected devices in the home and everybody has them, then the utility can start to match supply and demand, and they can do it in such a way that you don't notice. What I mean by that is if there's an event that they need to reduce energy consumption, if they can do it over 500,000 households, then they could do it by dropping the lumens in your Philips light bulb by 10 lumens. You don't notice it. Yeah. But if they do it over 500,000 houses, that's a huge energy saving.
Of course. And they also don't have to plan for things by just guessing on trends. At night there's less power used. Well, unless of course it happens to be like the Game of Thrones season finale, and everybody's having huge viewing parties, and so everybody's pulling a ton of juice.
Do you know what's going to happen at nighttime though? At nighttime you're going to get people plugging in their electric vehicles.
Right.
So what they need to do there is stagger the charging of them, and that needs to be done smartly.
Yeah, because since each one only needs X number of hours to get fully charged,
that's it.
You could sort of actually monitor, okay, that's charged, I'm just going to stop doing that one and not waste the juice.
And again, it needs to be done in an automated way that's invisible to the car owner, so that the car owner, comes home 7, 8, 9 p.m. in the evening, plugs in the car, and the car is charged at 6 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning, whenever it is. And it becomes a learning environment where the system knows that I get up at 7 in the morning and jump in my car, so the car needs to be charged at that time. And if I'm going to...
Or even more so that I come home at 7, but then I leave again at 11:30 for some reason, come back again at 2, and then leave again at 6.
Yeah.
So I need to have some charge put back in that intervening time.
And if you go out of a normal use case, you can then set an alert to say, look, I will need the car at 3 o'clock in the morning this morning. Otherwise, it's considered to be as normal. And, like the Nest thermostats learn your patterns, the same would happen with the car.
Exactly. And I think there are, there's really one big holdup for that. And this is probably a very U.S. problem and maybe also a European problem. I haven't seen it be brought up as much in like the Asian markets yet, but the idea of trust, I think, is a real problem in the consumer space. I don't think, and since 3/4 of them, the only news they see about IoT is about some big breach or botnet attack or whatever. I don't think they trust that their homes are safe, especially if they're automated, especially if they're not seeing the traffic. And so, if they add in all these smart devices, they count on who? The internet provider, to protect them, which we've seen again and again is not happening. So
I think you're right, and I think particularly in the US, there's a lack of trust between consumers and utilities, and it's less so in Europe. I think partly because in Europe we have a liberalized market for our utilities, so that they actually have competition. And because they have competition,
what's that like?
It's awesome. Because they have competition, they actually care what we think.
Right.
But more seriously, and this is a conversation because I've a strong utilities background, and I've spoken at many utilities events. One of the problems utilities have is communication. They do it really badly, if they do it at all. The only time you hear from your utility company typically is if they are A, sending you a bill, or B, sending you a disconnect notice. Neither of those are positive forms of communication that are going to engender trust or love or anything like that. And if you think, Ken, in any relationship, the key to any relationship is communication.
Flowers as soon as you get in trouble.
There's that too, but no, it's communication. It's and utilities, have not been the best at it traditionally.
I mean, that's pretty much basic modern marketing philosophy. It's be in touch. Now, social media is one way that many companies do that poorly, but I think that you're right. Is communication and transparency in that communication.
Yes, yeah,
it can't
absolutely.
all be broadcast. Sometimes
No.
it has to be two ways, and you have to make it clear why you're asking a certain customer for a piece of information or that kind of thing. I think
I did a case study on this a few years back for a talk I was giving, and the talk, this was back I think 2010, 2011. And the talk was at a utilities event where I was talking about the use of social media. So you can imagine 2010, use of social media in utilities is very, very limited. But one of the utilities that I came across did a spectacular job. And they're a US utility called BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric.
Yeah.
And I checked out all their channels, all their social media channels, and they did a stellar job. And it was shortly after Hurricane Irene, I think it was. And in the run-up to Hurricane Irene, well, after Hurricane Irene, they had published 26 YouTube videos. 11 of those were published in the run-up to Irene, where they were telling people their plans for how they were going to deal with the aftermath of Irene. And the next 15 videos were then them actually dealing with the aftermath of Irene.
Wow.
They had 300 and something photographs in their Flickr feed of them working on Irene, both before and after. They had blog posts. Their whole Twitter feed, and no other utility was using Twitter at the time. Their whole Twitter feed was them responding to customers, and the response was typically things like, send me your account number in a direct message, and I'll give you an estimated time of recovery. So they were very, very forward-looking in this, and did a phenomenal job. And I got to think their customer sat ratings went through the roof after that.
Oh, of course. I imagine, because in a situation like that where everybody's going to be unhappy with everything.
Yeah.
The only answer is, and unfortunately, the only answer is going to be we're doing our best.
Well,
to explicate, to show that you're doing it.
That, and also, as I said, the attitude on Twitter was spot on. It was, send me your account number by DM, and I'll send you an estimated time of recovery for your area. Because if people know that they're going to be offline for 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever it is, they'll go, okay, it is what it is. It's a hurricane.
Yeah.
It's not like it's not like the utility messed up. It was a natural event. I know now how long I'm going to be offline, so I can plan to do X, Y, and Z. But if they don't know, if you're sitting there going, is it coming on now? Is it coming on now? Is it coming on now? Then you get really frustrated. So
do I need to go out and get more propane? Do I need to do these things, or am I going to be on in a half hour?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's the lack of information that makes people mad, not the outage. So dealing with that is it takes away a huge amount of frustration on the customer's part. The other side of this, though, that came across really well was a lot of the news organizations publishing stories about Irene and publishing stories about outages suddenly had a whole load of content that they could use for their stories. They had the videos, they had the photographs, they had the blog posts, they had everything. So they were used. Newspapers picked them up and ran with them. And it led to a lot of positive coverage for BGE as a consequence.
Right.
And they defined the news.
Yeah. And that is pretty much invaluable, because in those situations, it's really easy to be either the good guy or the bad guy.
Yeah.
Especially if you're the utility company or the, other infrastructure company, you're not going to be able to sit on the sidelines and keep quiet about it.
Correct.
So you may as well be the good guy.
Yeah.
You may as well look like the good guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other industry that I think should be taking the lead and is going pretty slow at it, but I understand why, in terms of consumer trust and industrial trust for the IoT, is healthcare. I think that in the healthcare space, they have a lot to gain. I think they recognize they have a lot to gain by IoT implementation, and they're still working out privacy compliance and security compliance and cost of implementation, because that's a whole other thing for them, because everything's got to be running essentially perfectly before they're flipping the switch. But I think that if healthcare really gets in to the IoT heavily, the trust cycle will speed up, because people trust that their doctors and their hospitals are doing the right thing for them.
Yeah.
So if they're using if they're using this technology, then the version of it that goes in my house must be fine.
Indeed.
Seems like a logical.
Indeed. Yeah. And the amazing thing about healthcare is, if we're talking about the Internet of Things, we're talking about sensors, putting sensors on something and getting the information from it. But of course, these days, almost everyone has a smartphone.
Yeah.
Whether it's iOS or whether it's Android, everyone has a smartphone. And these smartphones are bristling with sensors. And on top of that, you could put another couple of things like, a Fitbit watch or something like that, or something that monitors heartbeat or something like that. And of course, that'll put information into the watch, which can then send it up online to wherever. And I thought one of the really interesting developments in IoT for healthcare was Apple's creation of Research Kit. And while I know Apple and iOS are only a portion of the market, Apple open sourced it. So it's available for any
which
platform.
everybody, I mean, I was surprised by. I think everybody was surprised by
They
that.
were. They were. And I saw there was a recent study, not a recent, yeah, no, there was a recent study published where, I forget which hospital in the US is doing it, but they're monitoring pregnancy in women using ResearchKit. And it's things like looking after their pulse, looking after their blood pressure, their gait just from holding the phone, several things like that. And they can do full-time monitoring because you know yourself, if you go into a doctor's office, it's a snapshot. And when you go in there, you're sitting in the waiting room for 15, 20 minutes if you're lucky, and you're getting more frustrated as you're sitting there because you're thinking about your next meeting, which is happening in 15, 20 minutes, and you're going to be late for it. So your blood pressure is going up and you're nervous because you're in the doctor's anyway.
Right. And any doctor will tell you that one visit's tests are always inconclusive.
Yeah.
You need a series of tests, a series of different conditions to look at if you're going to come up with an actual pattern.
Correct.
That's why the way I do doctors is completely wrong.
Yeah. No, that's it exactly. That's it in a nutshell. Whereas if you're getting, the entire baseline, and you can see then any odd things happening within it. I mean, there have been several cases already noted of Apple Watches, for example, alerting people to heart irregularities, and who would have thought? And this kind of thing has potential life-saving implications. It's amazing what it's going to do for us.
Yeah, I think that facilitating stuff like telemedicine and remote doctoring and patient monitoring and all that stuff is just going to improve the standard of care to a huge degree
enormously.
For folks who just essentially don't have care
enormously
or very, very limited care now, and it's going to accelerate innovation too, probably,
and smarter diagnosis.
In that the more that doctors can talk to each other, can share data about patients in a macro sense, I think that just makes for better knowledge, better care. Doctors are scientists. The more data they have access to it with better analytics, the better, right?
And exactly. That's it exactly. It's throwing all that data into an AI, and let the AI learn everything there is to learn about medicine, and then the kind of Watson model, and then you get smart questions coming to the doctors, or the doctors putting in answers to smart questions, and suddenly you get the diagnosis back in a fraction of the time with a higher level of accuracy.
Yeah, which is all good news. Unfortunately, we're getting near the end here on the IoT time scale.
That's okay.
Unfortunately, tea time is short. But before we go, I want to dip into your futurist hat for a minute and ask you to tell the future. Everything is 5 years away. Always. Yeah. Everything will be gigantic in 6 years. I believe the last estimate I saw, where we'll be in the quadrillions of connections and devices or whatever, which of course I think we all really know is fictional. But what are realistic expectations that folks can look toward in the industry, and what would you say are some of the steps that make sense to start taking advantage of the way the industry will actually develop?
Ooh, okay. What can people expect? Well, I tend to think a little further out than 5. So I tend to think 5 to 10. And in that kind of time frame, I'm seeing a lot of change in the automotive industry, for example.
Okay.
That'll be huge. Cars will be massively censored. And I don't mean censored with a C, I mean full of sensors.
Maybe.
And it'll come to a point where insurance companies will mandate sensors in cars. They will mandate autonomous driving, or if not mandated, at least penalize heavily people who want to drive cars themselves. So that'll be a thing, because I mean, just last year,
I think it'll be more of a hobby thing than anything else. It'll sort of be like model trains. You
Yeah.
know, there aren't a lot of train engineers that actually need to be there anymore. But some people like to drive trains.
But just last year, after the crash, after the famous Tesla crash,
Yeah.
where that poor man was killed, the NHTSA did a study into Tesla's autopilot. And they discovered that Tesla cars with autopilot turned on have 40% fewer crashes.
Right.
That's something the insurance industry are going to sit up and take notice of
Oh,
straight away.
oh yeah, and Volvo and Mercedes are seeing similar numbers
Yeah.
with their automated features.
In fact, the
Um,
CEO of Volvo came out and said that if one of their autonomous cars has a crash, Volvo will assume liability.
did he really?
The
I hadn't heard that.
CEO
Wow.
said that.
Wow,
That was amazing.
that's a gigantic claim.
Yeah, yeah,
It'll be
yeah.
interesting when he has to back it up. Whether, because I mean, of course, there will be crashes. Nobody's claiming that
Yeah.
100% of crashes are over, unless, of course, you reach a point where 100% of the cars are autonomous and it never rains or snows anywhere.
Well,
But
maybe I'm misquoting. Maybe he said, and our car was at fault.
there you go. That one I actually could buy.
Yeah.
That he will be very unlikely to have to actually shell out for.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's been a case yet where the car was at fault.
I don't think so.
Google's had a couple of fender benders with theirs, but the car hasn't been at fault yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's been one.
So
So I think you're right. I think the automotive space is just going to be the fastest moving and
Yeah.
and
I
the
think
biggest impact on everybody's day to day.
I think another huge impact on everybody's day to day is going to be the emergence of AR, augmented reality.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of years ago, Google Glass was a thing, and
Oh, I remember.
and that died a horrible death. And then we had the emergence more recently of the likes of Microsoft's HoloLens, which is starting to become a little cooler. But what we're going to get something like HoloLens, but smaller, cheaper, easier to wear, glasses-like, which means we will no longer have to take our phone out of our pocket because we will have an AR screen built onto the glasses.
Sort of a heads-up display kind of thing.
Exactly. And it'll mean that, for example, we no longer need computer monitors because you're wearing your monitor. And
Yeah.
you're not, instead of having a 15-inch monitor on your laptop or a 20-something-inch monitor on your desktop, you will now have a full-size 360-degree monitor. So up at your 11 o'clock, you can have your email, and on your 1 o'clock, you can have, and in front of you and behind you, because you've got the full 360 degrees. You can have all your
Right.
programs arranged around you, and with transparency mode set to whatever, and all voice controlled.
Yeah. I mean, I as a writer, I would still like to have the hardware of a keyboard
Yeah.
because that physical response, although haptic feedback is getting very, very good, that sort of physical sensation of response is still quite satisfying. But I can imagine
it's even
my
more than that,
children's
Ken.
age people not caring about that at all.
I think it's even more than that. I think you're right. I think it's even more than that. I've got voice recognition software on my computer. But if I want to write a blog post, I need the slowness of a
Yeah.
keyboard. I need to
Yeah.
be able to think. And if I'm speaking, my speaking style is very different to my writing style. So
I would hope mine is as well.
so I think I think keyboards they might be virtual eventually, but I think they're not going anywhere for a little longer.
Yeah. Although I will happily and willingly say goodbye to the mouse as soon as possible.
Yes, yeah.
That to me is just an input device that is past its time.
You're right. Poor
well,
old Doug Engelbart.
Tom, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap us up on my end.
Sure.
Please tell the folks how they can find out more about you and about your work day to day on the worldwide interwebs, and of course about your podcast.
No problem. So The blog is at tomraftery.com. I'm on Twitter at Tom Raftery. I'm on LinkedIn. Just search on LinkedIn for Tom Raftery. There's not many of us there. And the podcast is on iTunes, Google Play, and it's at iotheroes.com if you want to get it through the web.
Wonderful. And I'll put, of course, much of that in the show notes so that folks can find you easily.
And let's reciprocate, Ken. Tell everyone where we can find you.
Well, I am on Twitter at Ken Briodagh, or at IoT Evolution. You can reach me at either one. I write for IoTEvolutionWorld.com, which is where I put all the IoT news that fits to print. And you can check that out for news and events and that kind of thing. I run the IoT Evolution Expo with the rest of our team over here, which the next iteration of will be in Las Vegas the third week of July. At Caesar's Palace, where we sort of get face-to-face with IoT tech and work on that stuff. And, of course, I invite anyone who's interested to download the book, IoT Time, Evolving Trends in the Internet of Things. It's free and available at IoTEvolutionWorld.com. And the IoT Time podcast is also on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever good podcasts are given away for free. So please check those out. We host on SoundCloud if you guys like SoundCloud.
Superb. I'll have all those links in the notes as well. Great. Well,
excellent. Tom, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, Ken. Thanks a million for that. That's been great.
Oh, the pleasure's been entirely mine, and I'm sure my listeners to have an intelligent voice of reason for once. Should we take turns signing off? Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Okay. No, I'll just say thanks, everyone, for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
And I will, as per tradition, say that I'm afraid this is all the IoT time we have left. So I hope you all have a wonderful day.